Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Avatar comic review. This one's going to be for the Avatar The Last Airbender North and South Library Edition hardcover. So as usual, what this is the collection, the collected edition of the latest Avatar comic series, in this case North and South. And this book, what it is that it collects the individual parts, so part 1, part 2, and part 3 of North and South. It collects them together, and also the art is a little bit bigger, which I'll show off in just a minute. You have extras at the end, and then because this is the last Avatar comic that this specific creative team, Gene Yang and Team Gurihuru, did, there's also some added extras which are basically their kind of like goodbye thing. So Gene Yang writes a little piece, has a page where he writes just a kind of statement to the fans, and then Team Gurihuru do their kind of, I suppose, final official Avatar piece of art and have a little statement on it as well. So I'll show off that when we get to it. But this is, of course, the usual thing that they do with these comics. They release them in the individual parts first, and then later on they collect it in this big book. So the obvious comparison immediately is that, you know, this book is so much bigger than an individual part. Huge how much bigger it is. And I'll show off the art inside isn't necessarily that much bigger. So here's the back cover of the book, which is always really cool to see what piece of art they choose. And this one's very nice because obviously I think probably the standout thing from this series is probably the relationship between like Katara and Hakoda, her father. And it being more of the, you know, Katara Sokka focused series. So it's really nice, just all the blues and whites from the Water Tribe. Very, very nicely done. And then it's just your usual kind of idea of like, that's what it is. In the description, yeah, sketchbook of never before seen materials, and you know, behind the scenes look at the making of this series. And that's what it is. There's the spine, for anyone wondering. They keep the kind of same format of having that kind of dark color, and then, you know, North and South. Sokka is our kind of spine character this time out. And yeah, that's it, keeping it consistent. And yeah, so let's get into actually looking inside the book a bit. So, you know, you have your usual things of course, the kind of inner page is, of course, just a kind of black and white version of the map. You have your usual kind of little pieces of art as we go through it there. There's Katara, you know, there's Katara and Sokka on the sled. They just take out little pieces of art to kind of fill up some of these more fillery pages. You see there's a penguin. And yeah, of course they keep the, you know, clean cover art to kind of show off each section of the book, which is of course each section. So that piece of art there is obviously the cover for this one. And we move on. So we then get into, of course, the actual story content for part 1, which you can see here. And I'm going to attempt to show you just, I suppose, the difference in size of the art, because you can clearly see that there's a pretty decent kind of border there on the top, bottom, and the side. And that's because you can just about see there the writing there, which is the annotations that are on a couple of the pages in this book, which is basically Gene Luen Yang and Team Gurihuru giving comments about what's on that specific page. Obviously, Team Gurihuru primarily do art comments, and Gene Yang writes more about, you know, the actual writing of the thing. But anyway, let's show off the difference in size of the art. So you can just about see there that it's a decent bit bigger. Not like hugely bigger, but I'd say a good, you know, 10, maybe 15% bigger than it is in this book. So it is the most effective way to like get the art as big as possible. Though, as I've said in pretty much all of these hardcover reviews, I would much prefer they scrap the annotations and just fill the page with the art as big as possible. In that I definitely think they could make it like 25, 30, 33% bigger than it is in these parts, instead of just leaving it at only about 10 or so. Because the annotations, in my opinion, aren't worth the effort, the space that they leave here, because the big thing with the annotations is how many pages from the story content actually have annotations on them. So each book is 72, each part is 72 pages long in terms of the story content. So that's 216 pages overall of story content in this book. And in this case, there are 65 of those pages that have annotations on them, which is actually the most of any of these hardcovers, because this is something I've been keeping track of. So The Promise had 58 pages from the 216, The Search had 51, The Rift was the worst. It only had 36 pages of the 216 that had annotations on it. Smoke and Shadow had 60, and then this one has the most by a good amount, which is 65. Now that seems like an impressive thing, the most annotations out of any book. The problem is that a lot of them are like this opening page here, where it is just one line of dialogue. And in this case, for the first page, all it is Jean Yang saying, "I love the way Gurihuru draw a little kid, Katara so cute." Nothing insightful from like a writing perspective, which is kind of what the annotations are there for. So my idea for this has always been scrap the annotations, and in the extras, just add in like a text-based interview with Jean Yang about the entire North and South series. Include Team Gurihuru in it as well, but ask more directed questions rather than what it seems like is that they just let them go through the book and comment on whatever they want. And for the most part, nothing is too detailed. It's just, you know, little comments that don't have a lot of meaning to it. And then the Gurihuru art, you know, art comments are interesting at times to see where they made their choices, if like it was a direction from Mike and Brian to change something, or if it was a Jean Yang idea to like do something in a certain way. Similarly, Jean Yang, when he comments about like Mike and Brian actually had a recommendation to switch this from this to this, showing you that they are still involved, even though I think the last couple of comics it maybe hasn't felt like they've been as involved, but they've helped things to come along. In that, I think one of the more interesting things in the annotations that they talk about is that the initial plan for Melina was that she would be much more down the path of being like unlikable, whereas I think he specifically says Mike said to kind of calm that down a bit and make it more so that she's on the line of like the reader more or less makes their mind up about, do you like this character or do you not like her, and how do you feel about how Katara feels about her, which is definitely one of the more interesting aspects of Melina in the first couple of parts of this series, in that she is this really interesting character, but she doesn't quite initially understand the South, and you see some of what Katara is feeling, but you also feel that Katara is going a little bit overboard. The only other things I found really interesting with the annotations was that there's a few times where both of them, Jean Yang and Gurihuru, both note that during the writing process of this book was where they basically found out, it's where, you know, the decision was made that this would be their last Avatar comic series. And you can sort of tell by some of the things they talk about here that in a way they took this as more of, I suppose, a chance to have fun. That a lot of the reason why this book even has like Aang, you know, Zuko, Toph in it is that they wanted to make sure that in their last series together they had all of the key characters together. Now of course, I'm going to be the first one to make the point, where's Suki? You know, bring the team back together, except, you know, Suki, who it's probably one of the most baffling decisions in the entire comics, because if Zuko specifically is getting like, you know, he's coming to this place where he knows he may not be treated the best. Why isn't he bringing his main bodyguard with him? What's Suki doing back in the Fire Nation that's so important? If they have that connection of Suki is like Zuko's main bodyguard, why didn't she come down with him? Especially with the idea that also she would want to come to the South to see Sokka, her boyfriend. Like, I feel like Suki is just such a forgotten character, and it's one of the maybe one criticisms that I would have of like Jean Yang, of like, when it came to writing North and South, did you just forget that Suki was a character? Did you just not make the connection that it would make sense for Suki to come down? Because obviously the way this book ends is like, oh, happy moment, everyone together. Suki's not there. So really kind of frustrating on some of those points. But other than that, it's like there's a few moments where he has a longer comment, Jin Yang, and talks about like, oh, at this point we wanted to emphasize the difference between kind of like modernization and so on, some of the themes of the book. But I don't feel he ever truly goes massively in depth as such. There's one point where he mentions that Gilak and his group were initially in the early stages of planning more of a religious group, and they switched that to being a more political group because Hakoda was a more political character. That would have been interesting, though, to see if, obviously, for the most part, you tend to equate like religion in the Avatar world to spirits. So that would have been interesting to see where the spirit kind of angle would maybe come in, and how they would have done Gilak in that sense. Because as he's presented here, I've always felt with Gilak in this series that he comes across as a bit unnecessarily like crazy, whereas if he was maybe more of a religious kind of, you know, zealot, that would have made a little bit more sense. But anyway, it is what it is. As I said, you know, you get 65 pages of annotations. I'd say about 15 to maybe 20 of those annotations are just one-liners, like the first page which I showed you, really meaning that there's probably only around like 30 of those pages that actually have like annotations that are in any way like more than one line and interesting. But I think we're at the stage now where those annotations don't really mean anything. Like there's very little times that those annotations actually give us any like really interesting information. As I said, probably the most interesting bit here was just finding out that, oh, like that's really cool that, you know, we finally know for sure that they knew in the early stages of writing on this book that this would be their last comic. And seeing, you know, towards the end of it where they comment about that is really nice. But anyway, let's get into some of the extras towards the end, which is definitely, I suppose, the key unique thing. I know a lot of people just like specifically don't buy the individual parts and wait to get this big book to read it in the first place. So for those people who don't already have the individual parts, for sure, you know, seeing the story here for the first time with the art being that little bit bigger, with the annotations to give you the extra context, it's really, really good for your first time to read it. As ever, it's a really, really high quality book. But for people who kind of get both, like collectors like myself, the extras are definitely an interesting part of, you know, why this book is so interesting. So here is the first page of extras, which is basically Jin Wen-yang, his kind of goodbye, I suppose, his kind of farewell kind of little speech here, thanking everyone for his time working on Avatar, and, you know, thanking the readers and so on. You know, it's nothing massively, you know, like interesting and that. Like, it's not like he sets up anything for what's going to happen next in the series, that sort of thing. But he just talks about how much he loves this universe, how much he enjoyed writing it, how much of a pleasure it was to work with Mike and Brian, and all the people at Nickelodeon that were involved, Dark Horse that were involved, and, you know, just that this will always be something he remembers working on these books, which I think is just really nice that it really comes across through that page that he really, really loved working in this universe, and that definitely deserves a lot of he deserves a lot of praise for what he added to these books. He wasn't just the one writing Mike and Brian's intent. He added a lot of stuff to these books himself that I don't think they'd be the same if it was just written by someone else. Here's the big Guri-Huru piece of art we were waiting to see in full, and yeah, it's very interesting. It's just, again, as like the farewell kind of thing for their time on the comics. It's a little bit like, again, cool Team Avatar piece, except where's Suki? Azula, of course, is one of the main characters in terms of like her involvement in the search, and then in Smoke and Shadow. But Suki is part of Team Avatar. Why isn't she in there as well? Like, she was in, you know, a couple of these comics as well. So why like this? It just, I don't know. It just feels like to some degree that perhaps this is where Suki ends up just being this character that the fans maybe elevate to this level that maybe even the creators don't see her at. But it's kind of their fault because they placed her as part of Team Avatar. They committed to that relationship between Sokka and Suki, and now they've just seemingly abandoned it, and it's just really, really awkward and annoying. But it doesn't take away from like how, you know, nice that piece of art is. Team Guru's final comments, just that, the 5 years with these characters were very fun and precious for us. We really felt that this story was loved by so many people. They thank everyone, and that's their goodbye to the series. You get their kind of concept arts for the characters' designs for this series. Obviously, a lot of this is primarily like winter coats and stuff like that. You get the clean art of the cover, which is always nice to get, and then some kind of early stages, uncolored versions of like covers and back arts and so on. You also get the individual parts, like cover designs from like sketch to final product. And then one of the more interesting things here was that obviously an animal that they showcase at one point in, I think it's the first part, is a snow leopard caribou, or caribou. And they say that in the initial sketches for those pages, the animal was actually meant to be a polar bear dog. And they showed here that that was only the case in the early, like, initial sketch layout. And then when it came to actually finalizing the art, it did actually turn into the snow leopard caribou. I assume the reason for that is because Naga is such an important character. They don't really like or want oftentimes like such a important character animal to be seen as like the kind of the villain's animal in this case. So I assume that's why the change was made, because this is like effectively a Naga-like character chasing after Sokka and Katara, but they changed it to a more, I suppose, aggressive animal. But I don't know how well this will show up, but you can just about see it there, that it's a polar bear dog. And then where else on the page do you see it? Yeah, just there at the bottom as well. Here, you can see also on that panel that they're polar bear dogs as well. So that's just a cool little thing about the specific plans at certain points in the book for what they had. And then it's just more concept art pages, and we end, of course, with the part 3 cover, and that's it. It's I think as a final like book to cover the content from Jin Yang and Team Guru, it's fine. I almost wish there was something that made it clear that there is going to be a connection between what they've done and what's coming next. Now, I assume at the time that this book was fully prepared, edited together, they didn't maybe know about the new creative team. But I would have liked to have known for sure that the plots that they've set up are going to be resolved, and that Azula's entire arc is something that's just wide open. Some of the stuff from North and South is wide open. Some of the stuff from Smoke and Shadow is still wide open. I hope that stuff is still in the minds of everyone at Dark Horse, Nickelodeon, the comic kind of creative team. And it's not just going to be that like Faith Erin Hicks and Peter Wortman are just going in this completely different direction that's not going to reference anything that has come before in the comics. I hope there is a sense of like big continuity between these books, because everyone wants that Azula story and wants the connection to kind of continue on. But that's just my kind of thoughts on that. As for the quality of North and South as a story, obviously the aim of this review is not really to review the actual story itself, because I've done that before. You can see my individual reviews for like North and South Part 1 when it initially came out, Part 2 when it came out, Part 3. They're up on my channel already. You can see them. I think I have a playlist called Avatar Comic Reviews, and you can find those there, and you can find my thoughts on it. I will say though that now that the library edition is out, I will be doing later on this week, I'll be doing my next Avatar Weekly discussion topic video, and that's going to be a look back at North and South, the comic series. So, I'm going to reread this whole series in the next couple of days, and then probably Friday or Saturday, my video will be basically a kind of in-review look at North and South, to just kind of cover this now that it's been like fully released, now that the library edition is out. So that's been the review. Great book. Absolutely, if you have yet to read this book and have been waiting for the library edition, it's the same high level of quality as all of the other library editions. Highly recommended. If you are just kind of interested in the extras, again, it depends on how much of a collector you are. If you have like all the individual parts and you already have all the other library editions and everything, absolutely get this book, add it to your collection. There's some nice stuff in here for sure. Why not, kind of type thing. But if it's just kind of like, oh, new Avatar merchandise, I kind of want to get it, but I already have the series, don't really care much about the extras, that's maybe the sort of person where, like, yeah, you sort of need to question, do you absolutely need this? Because, you know, it's not the cheapest book in that if you buy from a comic book store with the comic book release date now, it's $40, which is more or less what I paid, €40. If you wait for like the Amazon release and stuff like that, you can probably get it for closer to like 25, just in or around 30, which makes it, I think, much more of a kind of better value proposition. But I wanted to get my review out as quick as possible. So, you know, overall, pretty much the same as almost every library edition. It's good. The extras, I think, just ultimately end up not being as good as you think. But this time, at least, we have those kind of final goodbye moments from Jin Yang and Team Guruhuru, which make it a little bit more worthwhile. Like, I'm really glad that I actually have like a, you know, the hard copy of this book and have that piece of art from Guruhuru in here, and have basically have every single release from them as kind of like the creative team. So it's interesting that we've come to kind of the end of this era, these 5 years of Avatar comics, and we're now starting with a new creative team, and hopefully the quality remains just as high. But yeah, that's been my review for the library edition for North and South. And yeah, in the comments let me know if you're going to be picking this book up, what are your thoughts on it, what I had to say about it. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.